I'm Nate Lind, and I help people interested in buying or selling online businesses get the transaction done without the deal falling apart. If you're looking to buy or sell online businesses, then be sure to keep tuning in for more videos like this one. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications about new videos and interviews. And introduce yourself in the comments. Are you a buyer or a seller? Enjoy the interview. Hi, everybody. Nate Lind here. I've got another who's who from the M&A space. We've got another fellow broker from Website Closers, Carson Bomar. Carson, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got into all this, and I'd love to hear a war story from you. I understand there's one that came out of the Ecom Empires group here on Facebook.
Absolutely. How you doing, Nate? Thanks for having me. My background started in actually the medical field. Early on, I started a medical billing company here in Tampa, Florida, which grew quickly into a full-fledged physician practice management company. And way back when, before anybody even knew what software as a service was, I actually took my medical billing company and the software and rented it out via PC Anywhere. And so I was charging doctors a fee on a monthly basis for them to use my billing software remotely. So it's kind of interesting how we've come fast forward to this day and age. But eventually what happened is I got out of that field. I sold the billing practice. That was my first experience with business brokering. I had no idea there was such a thing. That broker for a number of years kept trying to recruit me. I was off doing other things that I felt were more worth my time. And then we hit the Great Recession. When was that? 2006-ish, 8-ish, somewhere around there. And after going through some mergers and acquisitions with other software companies, I decided I want to go talk to this guy about business brokering and find out more about it. And had a quick conversation with him about the keys to this business and how to do it. And said, screw it, I'm doing this. I want to go back to being self-employed. So I jumped in feet first. It was 7, 8, 9 years ago. Here in Florida, you have to get a real estate license to practice as a business broker. Took the test, jumped in, got it, got licensed, went over that same day, signed up with the Sunbelt Business Brokers, and immediately started doing the training. And this is a hard business. This is not easy. It's probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. In fact, building my medical billing business was a lot easier than doing this, which is kind of amazing. People talk about trying to get into sell something to a doctor. I always found that was the easiest thing to do compared to this. But I dove into this. Sunbelt went through a merger, met Ron through time, and here I am. And I love the world of e-commerce. I'm learning something new every day. So 3-4 years ago when I started here, I was probably like a lot of people when they're looking for an e-commerce business. What the hell does FBA mean? When I heard that term on a call, I'm like, FBA, what does that mean? So fortunately, like a lot of people, I found resources out there. One of those resources that I came across was Ecom Empires. And one of my very first listing leads mentioned, he learned everything that he was doing in his drop ship business through Ecom Empires. And at the time him and I started talking, he was doing about 50, 60 grand a month in sales. But he had a full-time job. And as a lot of people know in dropship, it can be a grind. It's work. There's nothing easy about ecom. If people think, oh yeah, I'm going to get an ecom business and work 1 hour a day. No, it just doesn't work that way. You have to commit and study and stay consistent with it. But this guy decided he wanted to sell. And I was amazed that he did this based off of a free education website. So I immediately jumped over to Ecom Empires and jumped right in on their education. And I learned a lot. That was my basis from a broker standpoint to educate myself. So when I'm talking to people like you, Nate, who have been in this industry and you know it, at least I had an idea of what you were talking about when you started talking about some of the technical aspects behind building an e-commerce business. So that's kind of like from where I was at when I was 22, medical billing, doing my own thing, up to now. So that's a quick summary of me.
That's awesome. We interviewed Nick Peroni, the creator of Ecom Empires. He's part of the event as well. And I know he'll love to hear this story. So tell us about the, maybe, for obvious reasons, there's confidentiality, but tell us what you can a little bit about the scenario that you encountered with this situation, this listing, this transaction. And, some of the, maybe you can share some of the hair that was on it, some lessons that were learned from it that the audience can enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was a dropship site. And as you know, dropship sites can be very difficult to sell. And a lot of the dropship sites are very similar in that they don't have a branded product. They're out there churning products that they find that are unique on the internet, and they're just trying to churn them and mass sell them via social media ads. This guy did really well. He focused on 3 different areas. One was Freemasons. He found a good little line of selling Freemason type gear and did really well with that. Another one was in the blankets business, and not weighted blankets. It was more of designed comforter systems, and he did really well with those. And some of those were geared towards, kids and hobbies and things of that sort. And the other one was jackets, so custom hoodies, things of that sort that people could quickly go in and customize. And he had set up with an embroidery shop. And he did well with those 3 areas. But like I said, he was spending 4 to 5 hours a day monitoring and creating the ads and finding new products and trying to stay relevant as a drop shipper, along with working a 45, 50-hour a week job. And he didn't want to give up the job because of the benefits and things of that sort. We had it listed. We did get a lowball offer, and the offer was basically based on the fact that it was a drop ship site and the amount of hours that it required to maintain it. And he decided he didn't want to take that. And eventually, actually, he ended up closing the website. I've tried to get him to resurrect it and hire a virtual assistant and get it going again, because the virtual assistant could transition with the business and it could become a very viable entity because you've got somebody doing that lay work. And him and I are still having those conversations, but he's not convinced that that's a good way to go.
Yeah, it's a tough one. When the fire is lit and hot, it's exciting, and then sometimes it gets doused. And I certainly have experienced that with my own e-commerce experience, and it's a frustrating one. And I think that in particular, what is frustrating is those businesses are sellable. Yeah, it's maybe more difficult than a branded company that's got a strong sense of sales coming from multiple areas and warehousing that's shipping from the U.S. as a U.S. domestic company, that sort of stuff. But there is still we've got such a huge buyers pool that it's kind of with the heartbeat. As long as the business has been around for a while and has some profit, that there's buyers that are interested in it.
Yeah, and the other lead that I had that used Ecom Empires, again, it was another drop shipper, but he was slowly migrating the business to being a branded site, and he's still working it. But what he did was, and a lot of drop shippers do this, is you do the drop shipping to find a product that can hang and stay. It's not a fad. So they're looking for something that's evergreen. And, once they find something, then they, get with the manufacturer in China and negotiate the best price and buy it in bulk and stock it here and start shipping it, rebrand it as their own and start shipping it directly from the United States using a fulfillment center. So that lead, that seller still out there cultivating it. We'll see what happens with him, but he started with Ecom Empire. So so the things that you're doing with this summit, educating people, they're a necessity in this industry.
Yeah, we literally was just having a conversation with some fellow brokers about putting together kind of like a seller's checklist. Here's the things you need to check on the box as you're getting ready to prepare to go to listing, and some things that people can work on on their own, and then some resources of where they can turn to if they get stuck or where they need some help. So I think we'll have to put something together and put that out to the group, because that's been asked for now a couple of times. Okay, Carson, I sent out an email ahead of the event, and I got a bunch of responses back. It's basically about, what challenges are people dealing with right now, and I'd love to get your perspective on some of these. One that came up is on the buyer side. This is somebody that's been considering hiring an acquisition consultant or somebody basically to help them sift through the opportunities that are out there. When do you think that that's applicable and reasonable, and when do you think it's overkill?
All right, we've got two different groups of buyers. You have buyers that are affiliated with investment groups, and they have that. They have an acquisitions manager, and they need that because sometimes they're closing 1 to 2 or maybe even 3 deals a month, and they're dealing with a large pool of money. If you're an individual looking to buy a business because you want to quit that 40-hour-a-week job, you don't necessarily need an acquisitions manager. You do need a CPA, preferably a CPA that understands e-commerce, because there's a ton of CPAs out there that have no idea about e-commerce. Speaking of which, my dad, when I sit down and him and I hash out a details on a business and the background information, he's like, I have no idea how they're even doing business because e-commerce is beyond his thought process right now. So you want to make sure you got a CPA that understands e-commerce and understands the fact that, and I just had literally a conversation a week ago with a CPA, and he was asking about, well, where's the rent expense? Where's the utilities expense? He didn't get the fact that this is an Amazon business and there is no rent expense. There is no utility expense. And so you got to make sure you, number one, if you're having a CPA go back through the records, they got to understand e-commerce. So hiring somebody to do the actual acquisition or manage it, no, that might be a little overkill on an individual basis. You do maybe want to hire somebody who understands how to vet the financials. Somebody helps you verify the information and what information you need to be requesting in due diligence. There's a need for that, just to make sure you're not making an emotional decision because you want to make a financial sound decision. So yeah, there's people out there that can help you do that and just kind of manage the due diligence and help confirm the numbers. That would be a good thing. But to hire somebody just to manage the acquisition, no. On an individual basis, no. But if you're a group of buyers, yeah, you probably want to hire a manager.
So this makes me think of like what's kind of the dream team for a buyer that's just an individual buyer? Like who do they? So you talk about the CPA. Is there anybody else that they need on their side in order to get the deal done? I mean, the broker, we do most of the heavy lifting as a broker. Is there anyone else that they necessarily is kind of fundamental required in the process, you feel?
A CPA and or an attorney. I mean, those are your standard people that you want to consult with. And if you don't want to bring in a CPA, at least bring in an accountant, somebody that has an accounting degree and understands what to look at in financials and can help you interpret them. The other thing I do want to say is you got to remember when you're looking at tax returns, the idea behind a CPA doing your tax returns is their goal is to minimize your profit. And that doesn't translate well when you're trying to, from a seller's point of view, trying to sell a business based on the tax returns, because the accountant's going to tell you we need to minimize your profit so you minimize your tax liabilities. And that is where those add backs come in from our standpoint. So the other thing you need to understand as a buyer is understanding what those add backs are. And when you're going through it, get the documentation on those add backs. That is one of the biggest things people don't do when they're buying a business, and that is verify those add backs. So if they're saying, oh yeah, I've been paying rent and it's to myself just because I have an office in my house, and we're adding that back in because it's an Amazon-based business and there's no rent associated really with the business, well, you want to see that documentation and see that cash flowing from the corporate account over to the personal account of the seller. So you want to make sure you verify those add backs. But CPA, attorney, those are probably your two biggest allies when doing an acquisition.
Got it. Let's switch back over to the selling side. What are some do's and don'ts that you see, over and over again with sellers? What's stuff that's working for them and stuff that's not working for them?
do's and don'ts as far as
like as they're going through the process, ensuring that the actual deal gets done, the closing happens. Have you seen some just absolute flubs that your clients have goofed on, and some recommendations for maybe what not to do?
Yeah, the biggest one with sellers is, I've already had this probably on half of my deals over the last couple of years. Here we are, we're in May? We're in the middle of May, May 15th actually. And let's say we're going to have a closing June 1st. And I've literally had pretty much every seller cross this bridge and go, I'm going to pull back on marketing. I'm spending 10 grand a week on marketing. So I'm going to cut that down to maybe 2,500 a week just to save that money and put that money in my pocket. Well, in this business, you can't count your closing commission until it closes. So as a seller, you can't count that money until it closes. So I have that a lot. You come around June 1st and something happens and the buyer needs to push it back 2 weeks or 30 days. And next thing you know, they're going, hey, can we get the updated financials for May and June? And all of a sudden, we see declining revenues because the seller has pulled back on their ad spend. That's the worst thing you can do. And I've had that happen so many times, and it's very frustrating. And it will affect the closing price. A lot of times it will affect the closing price. So don't do that. Trying to pack that extra money into your pocket at the end, don't do it. It's just not worth it.
That's the second time I've heard this. We interviewed Chris Novak, and he said the same thing as a part of his. He sold a business with website closers I think it's last year or the year before, and he said the same thing. He ended up having to take a bit of a haircut on the sales price because he pulled back on the marketing. It wasn't like the last 2 weeks; it was kind of over some time, but he did express some frustration in the actual final closing price he had, and recommended for people to keep the pedal to the metal, keep the gas on.
Yeah, keep growing it. I mean, it's going to help you because bottom line is until it closes, everything's negotiable. Nothing's off the table until it closes. So we've had the opposite happen. We've had sellers do that where they've done everything they can to maximize revenues and maximize profit. And then they get down to it and start looking at the multiple they're getting paid and they go, wait a second, I want more money. I mean, Ron and I had a deal like that where it got all renegotiated the week of closing, literally 3 or 4 days before closing. So do not stop and that's our job as brokers is to help that process. So if that comes up, that's our job to handle it and have everybody come to a meeting of the minds.
So let's switch gears and talk both on the selling side and on the buying side. What are some of the best ways that the transition of the marketing is done effectively? A lot of these e-commerce businesses and online businesses, they're very heavy on paid media, paid advertising and social media, based advertising. What are some ways, and even those that are going through the SEO process, have you seen in the due diligence process or other mechanisms or techniques that the marketing can continue on gracefully throughout the transaction?
Yeah, this is a big one because as you know, e-commerce, it all revolves around the marketing. I mean, we were just talking about that with the ad spend and you cut the money back. As far as transitioning it, the biggest issue I've seen is people always think they have a better way. And that's true of anything. And the biggest thing you can do when you buy an e-commerce business, let's say it's generating 10 grand a month in net profit. The first thing you do is don't change what's creating that money. Don't pull back. Don't try to modify it. If you want to add something, let's say they don't really use SEO and they use basically social media driven ad campaigns. Don't change what's going on in those social media ad campaigns, but you want to add SEO to see if maybe that'll help. Absolutely. Go in there, add it, change it, work it. But the biggest thing is I see, and I just had this happen with a sales funnel on an orthopedic product. And they had gone through, 15 different products and sales funnels, different techniques, and narrowed down to 5 that were generating literally almost 50, 60 grand a month in revenues. 5. 5 of them. 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 for 5 different products. And this guy bought the business, and this was literally just 60 days ago. And he's playing with these sales funnels and trying to tweak them, and he has basically killed the cash flow. And so and now the sellers are back involved in trying to get this guy, get his sales funnel corrected. And thankfully they're being, I guess, a little
helpful,
empathetic.
Yeah.
I mean, they feel bad for this guy, and they're like, dude, we told you not to mess with these because they work. So that's the biggest thing when you're dealing with a business and you transition the marketing. Don't try to reinvent that wheel. What's working, keep it. Let it ride. Just monitor it. If there's a hiccup or something happens, like with a logarithm somewhere that changes the results, then get involved and start messing with it. But that's probably the biggest thing, is that transition of the marketing is, don't think you can do it better. I mean, sometimes you need to leave those funnels as they are and let them just ride it. Maybe go out and find new products. Look at that avenue first before you start tweaking something that's already generating a nice revenue flow.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of using adding different channels. So if the Amazon channel is already exploding, doing really well, leave that alone. Don't start tweaking with it, especially unless you've got some experience with it. Look at some other ways to add some incremental income. Start looking at the off Amazon side of things and get your storefront built and try some paid ads that way, or find an agency that can work on performance, and that way you're not
Yeah, and this group was mainly selling on back braces, and they had all these other products on their website that were dropship products, but they kept the back braces in a local fulfillment center in South Florida. But they didn't focus on any of the other products. So, that was what I told him. I was like, look, dude, grab some of these other products and try to create a new sales funnel and diversify your SKU sales instead of trying to tweak something that's already doing really well.
Interesting. I've got a client that sells neck braces. There's a parallel there. Medical support and bracing and support stuff.
Yeah.
It's a good.
Well, it's funny. I've got one now that does orthopedic seat cushions, and they also do supplements, and they also do essential oils. And they do no advertising whatsoever on the supplements and the essential oils, and they focus all their marketing on the cushions. So, of course, any buyers looking at that, they're asking about the seat cushions. I'm like, that's what's generating the revenue. What you need to do is add products. Either develop the product SKUs that are already there that aren't moving, or bring in new products.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very good point. Carson, do you have another war story? I love hearing kind of tales from the broker side of things, because it's often that there's complications that arise in the M&A space. And some of the funnest stories I hear are kind of about those and how they are overcome. Is there anyone else that's kind of like burning topical, top of mind for you that comes to you?
Yeah, this is kind of personal for me, and it had to do with, and actually it's kind of both bricks and mortar and e-commerce. But one of the first listings I had back in the bricks and mortar realm was a pet spa business, and the lead came into the office, and another broker fielded the call and basically didn't want anything to do with that business, and said, yeah, we'll have a broker call you. He just pretended like he was the receptionist. So the next day I come in and there's the lead on my desk and said, here, call these people. They want to sell their pet spa. And so I drove out to Lakeland, which is about 45 minutes from Tampa, pulled up, and I'm thinking, who the heck wants to buy a pet spa? Well, lo and behold, this thing was a little cash cow. Mom and daughter business with 2 part-time people working in it, but they were literally taking $2,000 to $3,000 a month or a week cash out of this business between mom and daughter. And we ended up selling it. And it was so funny because the broker who took the call wanted nothing to do with it because in his opinion, it wasn't a sellable business, which ironically, that is a problem that, number one, a lot of sellers have. A lot of sellers think their business is not sellable. Another one example of that is from the flip side is there's a bike shop here in Tampa, one of the oldest running bike shops in Tampa, very well established. The sellers called me one day, wanted to meet, wanted to discuss selling the business. I walk in, sit down, and talk to them. And the first thing the husband says, the business isn't worth anything. We're not making any money, And the wife took care of the books. So it's kind of funny to find out they're making about $250,000 a year when you started adding back the add backs, some of the things that are running through the business, things of that sort. He had no idea. And she thought because of that, nobody wants to buy the business. So they were both on the same level. Nobody wants to buy this business. So number one, as a broker, I don't know, Nate, what you find attractive in a business, whether it's a good investment. The same thing probably in the stock market. I don't know what you see. You look at something, I go, no, it's not a good investment. You go, hell yeah, I'm all in. And the same thing with businesses. As a seller and or as a buyer, we don't know what people are going to find attractive in an opportunity. So the biggest thing with this is keep an open mind. I can't tell you how many times I just dealt with this literally a few minutes ago. I sent the guy the OM, and not even 2 minutes had gone by. I get an email response back, and the guy goes, not interested. I'm like, how the heck did you value or even review that OM? And our OMs, I mean, typically there's 4 to 5 pages of general information about the industry and the business. And then we have a 3 or 4 page seller interview. So these documents are 6 to 10 pages long sometimes. There's no way you could have sat down and analyzed and soaked it all in and thought through it. So that's the biggest thing from a seller standpoint of view. Call a broker. If you don't think your business is worth selling, let a broker tell you that. Don't assume it. Call the broker. From a buyer's perspective, sit down and analyze and read through, be thorough. Read through the information that we're sending you because there may be something in there that clicks. And if you just surface and skim it, you're wasting your time. If you're not serious about buying a business, if you're not going to sit down and actually review the information that we're sending you. So that's kind of like one of my war stories. And I can't tell you how many times I've been through that process of dealing with the seller. Heck, how many leads I get across my desk, and every time I call the person, I don't think my business is worth selling. So that whole process from the buyer and seller perspective about what will somebody buy my business for, or what will somebody look at my business and say it's worth something or it's not worth something. So I don't know. We don't know those answers. However, all we can do is gather information and present it.
And the list of buyers that we have is so freaking large. Let the market respond. Let them. We were talking about kind of the threshold for entry, and you'd mentioned it's basically financials. Put together the marketing package and let the market respond, right? Like it's pretty low barrier entry and pretty low time and cost involved, and let the market speak. Let the buyers speak, whether it's valuable or not.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because from the buyer and seller perspective, what you need to get started is financials. So if you're a seller, you need 3 years of tax returns minimum, or your latest 2 tax returns they have completed in a year to date, P&L. And then the same thing from the buyer's perspective. The bare minimum you need is a personal financial statement and a minimum of $100,000 in the bank. I mean, that's going to be kind of like your bare minimums. So it's kind of funny you just said that. I'm like, actually, they're very similar, but from both buyer and seller, we need both of those to happen. We need financials.
Money talks and bullshit walks. That really is like, I've made this analogy a couple of times for e-commerce entrepreneurs, is that your product listing, the photography of your product, and the copywriting that's detailing what your product is, a product description. That's what encourages and incites interest from a consumer to buy the product. And in the M&A space, it's the financials, the P&L, the balance sheet, the taxes, all that information is what the buyer's looking at often before they even get to, probably in the case of that guy who said that he wasn't interested, he looked at the numbers, didn't even bother looking at the website, didn't look at any of the collateral, didn't read the seller interview. The first thing he looked at was the numbers and the expenses and that kind of stuff on the worksheets that we've got. And it's just a harsh reality of life. Like buyers, they first want to see numbers, and then, they'll talk. And as a seller, like you said, I'm interested in the same thing. Does a buyer have an ability to close, or are they just kicking the tire and looking under the, looking under the hood and checking out how shiny my engine is? Like what, why do I want to spend time dealing with that? So it's kind of
Yeah.
each person needs to think from the other person's mindset, and they have to answer that what's in it for me mentality on the opposite side.
Yep. And when we're dealing with buyers, and I mean, last week on one listing alone, I had over 125 inquiries on one listing. And I want to know who those tire kickers are. So from the broker's perspective, and you're a buyer, when we're asking you for personal financial statements and proof of funds, we're doing that to prioritize our time and make sure we're not wasting our time. Because if you don't have money in the bank and you don't have the ability to get to the closing table, then don't be wasting our time. I mean, that is what we're saying. And we don't need a bunch of emails hemming and hawing trying to get around it. I mean, we're just going to start ignoring you. I mean, that's just what happens in this field. And unfortunately, you're right. Money walks. Money talks. Bullshit walks. I got that backwards.
Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to subscribe and tell me what you thought about it in the comments. Your comments encourage me to continue posting videos, and they give me ideas about what to post next. I read and reply to every single one. Also, if you own an online business and you're curious of how much it's worth, click the link below to get a free business valuation with a member of our team. Who knows? It may even be me you're talking to.